Okay, so this is our chapter 6 Kahoot game. So we'll see how about chapter 6 is making sense. Okay, that was fast. So we talked about static, and so instance methods do not have the keyword static in their headers. That's true because static means you're not working with an object, and instance means object. So instance methods are methods that go with an object. So if you were talking about methods that go with an object or instance methods, they don't have static. They're not static. Okay. Okay, let's take a look at this. When an object is created, the attributes associated with the object are called. These like sometimes the wording is tricky for this. Um, so the attributes are like the fields, the properties. So we sometimes just call them variables, but they go with the object, so they're instance variables, instance fields. Um, so the attributes are it's just another word. You'll hear people call them all kind of things. Basically, it's what is describing the object. So like, height, weight, name, those variables that go with it that describe it, the attributes, the properties, the fields, the variables. And sometimes you'll use the word instance because that means object. So these instant methods are the actions that the object can do. So like if you can, get the area of you know, rectangle or, what are you trying to do? So those are the instance methods. Fixed attributes are ones that can't change. So those are like your constants. And then class instances, I don't really, I mean, I was kind of just there to throw you off. Um, so if you instantiate a class though, that's an object, but does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Okay. Oh, great job, everyone. So a group of related classes is called a package. Good. So we haven't done much with that. We'll try to do a little more with that, but we've been having to do that since day one because when we get into NetBeans, it says, it puts like the word before our class and then that makes it a package. But we could do that and start naming things better as we get things that are more related. But we've been importing Java's packages all along. And so if we want to use like the JAX Champagne, we have to do the Java X.swing package. So that gives you access to that package. Okay, so okay. Okay, so the scope of a private instant field is okay, and it should be the instant methods of the same class. And this is hard to kind of get because remember scope means what can you access. So if you're talking about a private instance fields, which we try to make those fields private, the reason is because we don't want everyone to be able to access them from anywhere. So if those fields are private, then the only place you can access them is inside the file or the class that they're in. And so those methods that are inside that class can access it. But outside that class, if they're private, you have to go through one of the methods that are public to be able to access it. So that's the point of it, is that if we make those public, anybody from anywhere can access them. And if we make them private, only that class can access it, but then you have to go through a method to be able to do that. And then that way you can add your validation, and you make sure that you're not putting bad data in there. So you're allowing you to access it, but through a method to do so. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Okay, so what does the following UML diagram entry mean? And so if you're looking, this is telling you that there's a set height method and it's public because the plus sign means public, the minus sign means private. It tells you that it has a parameter that is called H and it's a double. So probably the height coming in that you're trying to set, right? And then void means it's not returning anything, okay? And so on the options is public method because we want to eliminate the ones that say private because it had the plus sign, so public. So it's one of these two with a parameter type double that doesn't return a value. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's see how we did. Okay, good job. All right, so what I want to do is I want to bring up this UML diagram that I have for a car. And because I want you to understand how to do this. Now, you're not going to have to do this for your assignment or your checkpoint in the chapter. In the future, we'll have to do a UML, but at this point, I just want you to learn how to read it. So we're taking a look at this, and we have this car class. So we need to create a blueprint for this car. And it's going to have 3 instance variables, 3 fields, a year model, a make, and a speed. So the year model is an integer. It could, or the year model is an integer. It could have been a string. The make is a string, and then the speed is an integer. Okay. So those are all going to be private. And then we're going to have a constructor. The constructor is going to be public. All of these methods are public. And it's going to match the same name as the class. And then it's going to take in the year and the make. Now, it doesn't take in the speed because we're going to assume that the car is parked, right? And until we speed it up and we actually go somewhere. So we're not going to take in the speed, just the year and the model. And then we don't have an option for creating a car that doesn't have data. So just the one option to create a car that has those 2 pieces of information. And then we're going to have a setter for all of our different fields that we have. So one to set the year. It's going to take in the year and set it, and then it's going to be void, set the make, set the speed. Now set the speed, this is where we can determine what speed we want to give it, but we're not going to do that when we create the car. Okay? Now, get for each one of these, and they're going to return the data type that you have up here. And then we're going to have 2 extra methods, one called accelerate, which is going to just add 5 to the speed field, and then one called break, which is going to subtract 5 from the speed field. So we would do all of these first, and then we would add these at the end to make sure we have them. They're not going to return anything. They're just changing the speed field. So when you say get speed on the car, based on how much you accelerated or braked and what you started at, it should give you the correct number for how fast that car is going. So again, then what we would have, what would be good, once we have all of that and we think that works, we would create another, well, you have to create the class with the main method, and we would just leave that empty. But if you go back to that class with the main method, that's where you can actually create a car, give it a year and a model, set the speed for the car, right? Unless you want to start at 0, because it automatically defaults to 0. And then you need to accelerate and brake and print it out to make sure it's actually working. So ask it, like, what is the year of the car? What's the model? What's the speed? And see if it's giving you accurate information. So the main method's purpose is for testing once you create the blueprint for the car. Okay, so we need to do these instance fields, this constructor, these setters and getters, then work on these. These are, adding to the field and subtracting from the field. And then once we're all done with that, then we need to go to the main class, the main method, I should say, and the other class, and test the program. So create a car, make it, set the speed, accelerate, brake. Okay, do that testing after you get the blueprint done. Does that make sense, everybody? So I'm going to give you some time to do this, and then I am going to bring up mine and talk about it. But I want to see what you come up with and where you're struggling, so we can talk about what is not making sense. If you want to work together with someone or you want to do it alone, whatever is most convenient for you. But let's see how far you are in about 10 minutes, and then we'll talk about, how much more time we need and reconvening to go over this. So see if you can do that. I'm going to leave this up here, but I'm going to stop the recording. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to kind of do some of this so we can take a look at it. So I have my code over here. And so first you want to start with the blueprint file, and you want to make sure that you're thinking about this UML diagram and you're starting with these 3 instance fields first. And so I want to put these 3, so if I put this over here, it would be easier. Okay. So if I have these 3, they're all private, and I made the year model an int. Again, it could have been a string, but so far so good. You got the instance variables. Then you should have, now this one you don't have to do because automatically it's set to 0, so technically you don't need to put that on there. But if you want to remind yourself that it is set to 0, that's fine to do. If you want to, it doesn't hurt. But automatically fields are set to 0 if you don't list them as what they're set to. And so taking in the year in the model, setting that year as the year model, and the whatever comes in as the make. Okay. And then you have setters for each of the different fields. So set year model brings in the year, sets the year, doesn't return anything. Same for the make, except now we're taking in a string. And then the speed. I know we don't have a speed field, but if you wanted to take the car and set the speed after you've created it, you could do that. So it does start at 0 automatically, but then you can set the speed at whatever you want. Okay. And then the year model this is a get for the year model, just returns whatever data type you have for the year, which I had int. And then string for the year for the get make, and then get speed is an int. And then hopefully you had a chance to make it to the accelerate at least and the brake. And so accelerate adds 5. Remember that speed plus equals 5 takes the speed, adds 5 to it, and replaces it. You could write speed equals speed plus 5, but that's just the longhand way to write it. So take and add 5 to it and replace it. That's what that does, that equation. And then the brake just takes 5 away from it. So again, you can write speed equals speed minus 5. That would be the same thing. It doesn't return anything. So remember we said it was void. It doesn't take in anything. If you wanted to, you could ask to take in a parameter of what you want to change it to, like you want to accelerate by 10 or what number, instead of just always doing 5. But we'll just say that it goes by 5, just because it's really slow to go by 1. Okay. And remember, you should try to have documentation on each of your methods. So you may not have had a chance to do that, but if you didn't, just make sure you're okay with that. So you can do /**, and then when you hit enter, it should automatically fill in some of it for you, and then you just have to fill in like the description and what each of the parameter variables is, and if it has a return type, what that is. But it should give you the structure, and then it makes it really easy to feed it to change it. And then remember, if you wanted to actually do that, it would be run generate javadoc, and they'll create like a web page that has documentation for each of your methods, which is always good to give somebody if you were giving them this blueprint and you thought that you needed more explanation. That's what that would do, give them documentation. Okay, you have a question?
Yep. So for the public void break, for an accelerator, I did capitalize the first letter. But as soon when I saw yours was lowercase and I made mine lowercase, my break was turned to blue, and I'm not sure why it doesn't want to register as a.
So this one was like capital B.
Yeah.
And now it wasn't.
Yeah, and then I made it to lowercase, and then
it doesn't like it.
Yeah, it's just.
Oh, just because break means something to do with it. BRAK. Yeah, great question. Yeah, because if you do it the other way, it's for like switch and everything
Oh.
when you break out. It's a keyword.
You're right, you're right. Thank
So
you.
yeah, sure, great question. Yeah, sometimes we hit those keywords. Okay, and then once you get that done, if you did have that, then you can do like the demo, and the demo is really just for testing purposes. So really, whatever you do is fine. You just want to try to test everything. So you should, at the basic level, at least be able to create a car and put some data in there, put a year and put a model. And you shouldn't get any errors, hopefully. But then you still don't know that it really, like your getters and setters and everything work. So then you should print the information for the car. So this gets everything. Now, when you start the car off, the speed's going to start at 0 because it automatically defaults to 0. I know I took that out of there, but that's the default anyways. So it'll start at 0. And then for testing purposes, I have it accelerating, and I could have used the loop for this, but just kind of could have put a for loop in there to accelerate how many times I wanted to accelerate. And then it tells you, so if you accelerated 5 times, then it should be 25 because it does 5 each time, right? So it should be at 25 here. And then you brake 5 times. Again, you can use a for loop for that if you want to. And then it should be back to 0. Okay. And I didn't use the set speed, but you could use the set speed instead of, it used the get speed and it started at 0. But if you wanted to set the speed at something other than 0, you could start at something different. So let's run it and see if it works. Okay, so it prints off. It starts at 0, and then it accelerates 5 times, so it ends up at 25, and then it brakes 5 times, so it ends up at 0. But for, just for testing purposes, I didn't test any of the setters, but I could test those if, you weren't sure if those were working. But pretty much if you don't get any errors, hopefully, on your blueprint, then it should be pretty good. As long as you're following, the same examples you've been using, it should work, right? But you can test to make sure. Does anyone have any questions about that? Yes.
Yeah, so I did have one question. So for the constructors, you're only allowed to have, you can have many multiple of them, but you can only have one of the same type or the name, correct?
Yeah, so you can have as many constructors as you think would be valuable for whatever you're doing, but if they have to have either different number of parameters or different data types for their parameters. So like if you wanted to do it, it would give you an error if you try to do like the same exact thing again. Like it would say, okay, you already have this. But if you did it and the other one you did only had a year, then it would be okay. Like if you
Oh,
is that what you mean?
the name, like car, like if you have a different name constructor with, you can only have car, correct? You cannot have
Yeah,
something
you
else.
can't have a different name for the constructor. It has to match the class name.
Gotcha.
So, and then it would get upset if you did like the same constructor twice. But as long as you have different number of parameters, so it's called overloading. So if your method has the same name, so the constructor has to have the same name as the class. So you can't change the name, but you can change the number of parameters so that it knows which one to match. This one only has one constructor, so you only have one choice. So, we talked about how like we wouldn't be able to create a car without data, how it would get upset. So like we don't have that option to do this. But it is interesting because it says you can't do that. But then again, remember we talked about what happens if you just get rid of this, and then that's the only option. So there's always a default constructor if you don't have one, but once you put one, that no longer exists. And so then it would be okay with this. It would say, okay, you want to do that, but it takes a second. But then you wouldn't have anything. Everything would just be blank because you didn't do any setters to set anything. So really, I kind of don't like the whole blank option. So I like it if you have a constructor that has, there we go, that has the data. And I didn't do the speed because that makes sense to default at 0. So sometimes you can leave off certain fields and default them if it makes sense in this situation. But yeah, you can have as many as you want, but they all have to be car.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then you don't need all the other stuff that goes with, like, you don't need to say the constructor is void because automatically it's void, and you don't need to say that it's public because it's automatically public. So you can leave off all of that if you want to. Okay, you can put public, you don't need to. Okay, everyone okay with that? Okay, did anyone run into any troubles or questions you might have about this? Okay, I'm gonna shut my video off.